All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for sharing. I just want to note a few housekeeping items before we dive into the content. This meeting is going to be recorded so that we can share it out afterward, just in case people miss it and want to catch it later, or if you are here today and loved it so much you want to watch it again, it'll be available on YouTube to watch. But just know that this will be recorded. Um, you do have the ability to unmute yourselves. I just ask that you try and stay muted during the presentation. If you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat, or raise your hand, and I'll try and address questions as they come up, or at a few select strategic points throughout the presentation. So with that, we are 3 minutes after the hour. We'll get started. So good morning, everybody. Just want to double check that you can hear me. A thumbs up if you know how to use the Teams reactions. Perfect. Okay, good. I've done it before where I've been talking for a few minutes and then realized that nobody could actually hear me. And that's not a great way to start a presentation. So thank you for that. Good morning. My name is Carson Gorecki. I am a regional labor market analyst with the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development in our Labor Market Information Office. You are here today at a labor market information training session titled Labor Market Information to Connect Education, Training, in the Workforce. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that is because there's a lot to talk about today. We're going to cover how labor market information can be used to both assess and inform our workforce education and training systems in Minnesota. And what I hope to leave you with today is a better understanding of how the resources available via us and others, and give you some confidence to incorporate them into your work. But if you do leave with only one thing today, leave knowing that us at DEED and in the Labor Market Information Office specifically are resources for you. We are here to serve you in your roles, and we do it at a very affordable rate. You pay your taxes so that you don't have to pay us to do the work when we do it. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the current labor market. I'd like to give a brief update to kind of ground us in where we're at right now, walk through and demonstrate the tools. So that's going to be the meat of what we're talking about today. We're going to focus on those tools that are used both by job seekers, education and training seekers, those that are trying to figure out what their next steps are, but also by folks that are trying to assess these systems and how they connect to each other in the workforce. So that'll be occupations in demand and career pathways kind of on one side, and then graduate employment outcomes, statewide longitudinal education data system kind of on the other. And then I'm going to show some examples as we go of how these resources can be used within this ecosystem. For those that are not familiar, what is DEED? We are the Department of Employment and Economic Development. Very simply, we help foster and encourage both workforce development kind of on one side and economic development on the other. In more plain language, we help people find jobs that sustain them and their families. We help them get those jobs via connecting them to training and education and good employers locally and employment opportunities. And then we help those employers both locate, grow, and succeed as well. And when it really works good is when both of those systems are working well in tandem, when employers and job seekers and workers are all succeeding at once. The Labor Market Information Office, we are within DEED. We are an office within DEED. And every state has an LMI, Labor Market Office, Labor Market Information Office. And each state, depending on how much they support or invest in labor market information, has different capabilities. But at its core, we produce these few specific pieces of information that you may be familiar with, like unemployment rates, jobs numbers that we publish every month, or in the case of the last couple months, a little bit more sporadically and unpredictably due to the federal shutdown. For example, we're publishing some statewide data right now as we speak for the month of November, I believe. So It's all a little bit topsy-turvy from our typical schedule, but we are publishing those data. But in addition to that, we publish a lot and work and do research on a lot more, including educational outcomes, occupations in demand, wages, and a lot more I'm going to cover. But really what we aim labor market information to be in socioeconomic data that we use is a foundation for informed and market responsive planning and strategy. And I believe that everyone here looking at the chat and the different organizations represented can use LMI in their roles. So how can job seekers, a little bit more on how they can use labor market information? First and foremost, career exploration, comparison, and planning. So imagine you're a high school student or a college student and you're trying to figure out how you're going to enter the workforce, or if you're a high school student, you may be thinking about, okay, I have this occupation in mind or this career in mind. How do I get there? Labor market information is really ideally situated to help those folks. You can use our LMI to compare wages across occupations, typical education requirements, and all sorts of things. But really what it is, when I talk to high school students and I'm in classes, is that it's a really good reality check. You may have perceptions as a high school student, and this is a good way to really check those perceptions against reality. Does that job pay what you think it pays? What is a typical wage? What can you expect when you enter the labor market, workforce, or training and education systems? And then for the rest of us that may not be job seeking currently, we can do research to inform policy, strategic planning. I've worked a lot with Perkins Consortia locally on comprehensive local needs assessments, for example. Wages, I say wages in both of these because you can look at kind of wages and what you can expect from a job seeker perspective, but also you can set wages from an employer perspective and say, I want to be competitive and attract the best candidates. How can I do that with the wages that are in our region, in our industry, et cetera? Grant writing and management. A lot of times grants and applications for funding will require some component of labor market information. I know there's a lot of job counselors, career counselors on here, and a lot of times just mandated as part of your processes to put in LMI. Economic development is too. In my experience working this job in the last 6 years, workforce development and economic development have become closer and closer together. We talk about these things like education, childcare, housing. Both sides of the traditional hierarchy, I think, are starting to meld together, and I think that is definitely a positive outcome, but it means that we're all concerned and kind of pulling in the same direction. And again, reality checks. There's perceptions on this side too, for all the folks that are not necessarily job seeking. We can check it against reality and facts. We have a lot of labor market information tools that come from different types of sources. They're collected in different ways. Survey-based is one way. That's how we get the unemployment rates and the jobs numbers via BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Census and administrative data. We pull one big example of that is our unemployment insurance wage statistics. We use those for a lot of great things, including the tools I'm going to talk about today. What do we do with the data? I've kind of touched on it a little bit already. I do presentations, we do research and writing. We have a lot of blogs that we write monthly. We also collaborate with stakeholders, a lot of you here today. So, workforce development boards, career counselors, job counselors, post-secondary institutions, et cetera. We do data requests. So if you have a specific question, we help you out with those directly. And then we create new tools to try and answer these questions. A lot of sources of data, Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Census Bureau are big ones. Minnesota Department of Education will be a big one we talk about today, but just know that these data are coming from a lot of different places, federally, locally, regionally, et cetera. And it's also important to just touch on there's different jurisdictions depending on the type of data that we're using. I'll just point to those top ones there: workforce development areas, economic development regions, and planning areas. You don't need to remember these necessarily, but just know that depending on which data we're talking about, it tends to be available for different areas. Okay, some core labor market information concepts. If you know this already, great. There won't be a quiz, but just talking about the labor force overall, what does that mean? For us, there's a very specific definition. So it's the civilian, non-institutional population, 16 years or older. And if you're working, you're employed, you're in the labor force, or if you're not working, you're unemployed and have looked for work in the last 4 weeks, the last month, you're considered to be unemployed. You are also in the labor force. So basically, if you're actively engaged in either working or looking for work, you're deemed to be in the labor force. If not, you're out of labor force. And then unemployment. You probably all think that there's a definition of unemployment. In fact, it is much more of a spectrum. So when you see the unemployment rate we publish every month, that is one definition out of 6 or more potential definitions of unemployment. You can see in this kind of spectrum here below this chart, as you go from top to bottom, the definition gets broader. So you can start with the U1 rate, which is just you've been unemployed for 15 weeks or longer, long-term unemployment. U2, you add in job losers, and so people who just transitioned out of employment, or people that have completed temp jobs. U3, this is the rate we publish every month. That's the official unemployment rate. That includes all unemployed, so people who are looking for work. And then you add in people who are kind of like on the edge, those that are discouraged. They would work, but they haven't looked in the last 4 weeks. They want a job, but they haven't been looking. And then those who are part-time for economic reasons. So they're working, but they would work more if X wasn't happening, if they had childcare, if they had transportation that was reliable, et cetera. Okay, so now that you have those concepts down pat, we're going to do our brief labor market update. I'll just point you to, I love the Pac-Man pie chart. Okay, I'll just check the chat to make sure we don't have any questions. None so far. All right, so labor force, you know what that is now. This is what it's looked like in Minnesota over the last 50 plus years. You can see how we peaked in about 2000 with our labor force participation rate. That's that blue line. So that's that share of people in the labor force. And that big rise from the 70s to 2000 was really fueled by women entering the labor force in larger numbers and shares. But it also coincided with the peak of kind of baby boomer generation being in the labor force. Since then, we've been aging as a state and as a workforce, and you can see the labor force participation fall to 69.7. You'd be like, wow, it's a pretty big decline. Minnesota's still top 5, top 10 in labor force participation nationwide, even as of 2025. So 68, 69 is still really high. You can see the impact of COVID. I will point out that our labor force has been growing despite a decline in labor force participation, and a lot of that has to do with just an increasing population throughout, even with a aging population. Looking at unemployment rates, you can see the geographic variation. Our unemployment has been rising over the last several months, but 3.7 historically still not super high if you look back years. But our 3.7 rate in September, and today we'll publish the November rate, it represents about 117,000 unemployed people. For comparison, the rate nationwide was 4.4%. And over the year, we've added about 21,000 people to our labor force. Jobs is that other part of that monthly jobs release equation. We are still adding jobs as well. So 6,100 were added in the last month into September, and that's pretty modest growth. Private sector fueling most of that with about 5,500 of the jobs. The U.S. by comparison also is growing, but a little bit slower than Minnesota. And then over the year, Minnesota added about 42,000 jobs over the year. You can see how that compares. That's our last couple of years in that chart there. And then looking at wages, over the month, the private sector wages grew about 25 cents into September. So the average wage for private sector workers was about $39.78. By industry sector, education and health services is really driving the growth lately. That's the over the year change. And it's also the largest sector of employment in the state. So to see that be the largest growth is not surprising. Also growing leisure hospitality, construction, manufacturing, also core sectors in our economy. At the other end, financial activities and information declined over the year. Information has been on a long-term, decades-long decline. Financial activities, that's been more of a recent phenomenon. Looking at job openings, we are seeing job openings gently start to decline from a high in the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. That's the blue line here. And then the orange line is the ratio of unemployed people relative to each job opening. So we still have fewer unemployed people as of the end of last year, fewer unemployed people then we have job openings. So we refer to that as a tight labor market, meaning that there are more openings than there are people to fill them. But as you can see, that gap is narrowing as we have more unemployed people and fewer job openings. What do those job openings look like? Our job vacancy survey covers these, reflecting our kind of distribution of jobs by industry. Healthcare and social assistance makes up about a quarter of all the job openings statewide, followed by accommodation, food services, and retail trade. Between those three sectors, you've got over half of all the job vacancies. And then that chart on the right shows you kind of the breakdown by wage offer for those vacancies, as well as the typical education that's required for those job vacancies, as well as the experience. This is just to show you the type of detail that's available with our JVS survey. We also can list the type of jobs that are in demand by the typical education required, which is a super handy tool for a lot of folks. Comparing to what they have in terms of educational training or what they hope to have. And then you can also compare the wages for those different occupations in demand. This is just the top 7 or so by each educational attainment requirement. And you can see in general, as you move from less education required to more, the wages tend to go up. That is the brief labor market information update. I'll give you 2 minutes to get some more coffee, use the bathroom, and then we're going to dive into using the tools. So when I say 2, I mean 3 minutes. We'll come back and we'll start at 9:53, and I'll just answer any questions that people have in the meantime. I know there's probably a lot of people that look like my cat Gordy here, so I want to give a chance to breathe and regather our focus for the tools that we're about to look at. So any questions in the chat, or if anybody wants to just raise their hand and ask a question, I'd be happy to answer them right now. All right, for those of you that are hanging around, I'll give you a head start on the tools. And I'll try and throw in links into the chat as we go. But if you want to go to our data tools page, the link is now in the chat. All right, as people are starting to come back, we'll dive into looking at the tools. There are several ways to get to our data tools page. One is to web search MND data tools. That typically has good success. Or if you're familiar with the Deed homepage, you can also navigate there to the data tab dropdown and then data tools. Or you can just follow the link I put in there. I'll make sure to send out links to all these different pages and tools that I'm referencing, so no need to try and panic and find them as we go. You can also search if you know what the individual tool you're looking for. You can web search that as well. Some tips and tricks when you're navigating our site. Keep an eye out for that left navigation bar. So that's that gray one right here. That can help you just navigate directly to a tool from any of the pages, any of the tool pages. So if you kind of get lost in where you're going, you can always go back. The tool landing page is often not the tool itself. You'll see a button like that gray one there or a green one. What we've done in the last couple of years is we've kind of tried to distill some of our data tools to their most useful content or most commonly used content. So we'll build a simplified version or visualization and put that on the landing page that people can just kind of drop in, get the one kind of data point they need and leave. If you have more in-depth interest or really want to dive into all of the data, then we suggest you go and use the data tool. So that involves one more clicking on that use data tool button. On each landing page, you're going to see tabs across the top that say more information, tutorials, training. Almost all of our data tools have some sort of guided component. So, if I'm not covering everything in detail here or going too fast, you can always go there and do it at your own speed and look for material that can be helpful in that sense too. And once you're in the data tool, there will be a way to return to data home, which is all the data tools or like the data home page. And then there's also usually a way to return to the tool name home. So that's like whatever tool you're on at that point. So as an example here, you can see the quarterly census of employment and wages, the little tabs there, data tool, instructions, about, more related data. And typically we'll have some related tools linked as well. The first tool I want to show you is called Occupations in Demand. And I'm going to throw that in the chat as well. I showed you a little bit of this earlier in the labor market update. So Occupations in Demand is a relative ranking of occupational demand by about 500, well, you can see 566 occupations statewide, but then also by region, because we know that there's variation locally on which occupations can be in demand. So each planning region is going to have its own list of occupations in demand. And with those occupations, we also include wages, so 25th and median wages for that. The current demand indicator is a star system, so 1 to 5 stars. So 5 stars being the highest demand, 1 being the lowest. We typically say if it's 3 or more stars, it's in demand in that region that you're looking at or statewide. Then we also include projected tenure growth. So that's what we expect that occupation to change by over the next 10 years. And then the projected tenure openings is what we expect to be open in that job over the next 10 years. So for example, home health and personal care aides, the first one listed there, that's a high demand in almost every region. 19,424 job openings estimated, and those can be created either from new jobs being added, so like new businesses or a business expanding, but they can also be created via turnover, so people leaving that job to go to other jobs, retiring, etc. But either way, there's 19,400 jobs that need to be filled in some sense over the next 10 years is what we're estimating. Education requirements, that's the typical education required to enter that occupation. And it's not necessarily what it is that the person has in that occupation. And then if there is any on the job training requirements, we have those listed as well. Also handy with occupations in demand, within that education requirements component, if you click, you can see that education requirement is underlined. If you click on that for an occupation, it will take you to actual programs that are connected to that occupation. So I clicked on registered nurses here, and then it lists all of the registered nursing programs in the state. So it's a way to explore some educational options for an occupation you're interested in as well. Taking occupations in demand a step further and making it a little bit more accessible, my colleague Luke Reiner, who's the Central Minnesota regional analyst, pulled together pieces from all of our career exploration tools and put it into a super handy one location that is nice to look at, easy to use, and intuitive, I think. We call it the Career Pathways tool. I will throw it into the chat. The Career Pathways tool core is from occupations in demand. So it has that demand ranking, that same thing you just saw in occupations in demand, with all the wages, typical growth, educational requirements. But what it adds, in addition to being maybe a little bit easier to use, is links to career force detailed occupation pages. So if you click on an occupation in that tool that I just linked you to, it'll take you to a career force detailed occupation page, which looks somewhat like this. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's got a lot of the same labor market information that we have, but what we don't have on this page, the career pathways page, is a more detailed explanation of what a registered nurse does, and then crucially, especially for my students out there, videos for like a day in the life. So if you're interested in an occupation and you don't really know much about it, sometimes a video can be a lot better for folks to watch to get an idea. It's definitely better than me trying to describe what an occupation is for somebody. So we point them to this, the Career Pathways tool being a fantastic career exploration tool that kind of pulls all of our resources into one place. And I mentioned the educational requirements, the typical educational requirements that are listed. Again, that's what you typically need to get into the job. However, as an example here, this is for registered nursing. The typical education requirements are associate degree, but if you look at the typical education of people holding this job, it's actually different. It is mostly people with bachelor's degrees. So that's important for people to know, because that means that there's people out there that if you get an associate degree, you might be competing with folks with bachelor's degree, and some employers might see that bachelor's degree candidate and prefer them. That's important information for people to know as well. All right. In addition to presenting to students and interacting with them and telling about all the great resources that are out there, we also think it is super crucial to hear what they are thinking. And there's a lot of surveys out there. The student survey just published their results a month or two ago, put on by MDE. We recently started a collaboration with MDE, specifically the MCIS, if you're familiar with that. And we are building a survey and testing it that is asking students, high school students specifically, about their career exploration experiences. Typically, we've done this live where we're at a career expo. We're presenting to a bunch of high school students, and we have live polling software, and we'll ask the questions. But that's like a really inefficient way to get these types of answers. So we built this survey, hoping to integrate it eventually into MCIS and then eventually SLEDS. We're kind of heading that way very slowly. But we're testing it to see how it's working out. And so far, we've got good responses. We've got over 2,200 responses through the end of the first half of the school year, 2025. And we ask a series of not too many questions, but hopefully getting at things that would be useful to people on the other end in workforce development, economic development, because there's a lot of perceptions on our end of what students want to do and what they are doing. And this is the way to kind of cut through that and just ask them directly. So one question is, what are you planning on doing after high school? Over half of our respondents are saying attend a four-year college. There's a significant share that are not sure, that we tell them that's fine too. That's kind of why we're having these conversations. Working right away, 10%, joining the armed forces, apprenticeship program. So just getting them thinking about like what's next. But over half are still planning on going to a four-year college. Here is the kind of cover page of the survey. I'll just go through quickly a couple of the other questions, just as an example. of what we're asking. This isn't all of them, but what kind of place do you live in and what kind of place do you want to live in? We think these are super important because a lot of times there's perception, especially out in rural Minnesota, that all of our students, they want to leave, they want to go somewhere else, namely the big cities or the Twin Cities. And if you ask a lot of employers in rural areas, that's the general perception. But the answers we've gotten so far paint a little bit more mixed picture. So um, most of the respondents so far have been from small towns or rural areas. So that's kind of where we've gotten most of our responses. We haven't gotten a ton from the cities yet. But of those folks, a third aren't sure what kind of place they want to live in. Again, that it's not super surprising. But then if you add together in or near my current hometown, which is largely rural in nature or small town, a rural area someplace else in the same area but not the same town, that's almost half of all those respondents that are saying like, if the opportunity is there, we'll stay in our rural area. There's still people that want to move to a big city someplace else, metro area someplace else, or the Twin Cities, but Twin Cities is only 3%. That's a lot smaller than I would have guessed. What career field are you most interested in? This is a super important one because we can align this with the jobs that are being taken or available, and then really get at that, like, are the jobs that are in demand the ones that students are interested in, and vice versa. Healthcare and human services is kind of the top of the list. That is not a surprise for me. Again, it's the largest sector in the state, but it also points to increased interest among high school students, because I do not think that if we asked this question a decade ago, the share would be as high as it is now, but there's increased awareness among high school students of healthcare as a strong sector that is growing and has a lot of good opportunities. Another thing that's cool that you can do with this is you can compare it to like, so you can filter the data to like a county and say like, okay, 60% of the students here said that they're interested in manufacturing opportunities, like manufacturer production opportunities. What's the share of jobs that are actually available in that county if students want to stick around for that industry? And it might be a lot lower. So there's a misalignment there, or a perception of more opportunities than there are in the actual workforce. How do you feel about career exploration? So just kind of getting the sense of where students are at. And you could filter again this by what grade they're in. So hopefully you have fewer students when you're responding to this in 12th grade that are saying, I feel overwhelmed and I don't know where to start. Hopefully we get more of those in the 9th, 10th, some 11th grade. But you've got folks here that are interested in careers but haven't taken much action. That's okay. The bulk of our respondents are 10th graders. I only explore careers I'm already interested in. People have more focus, actively seek out information about different careers. Awesome, that's what I like to hear. And then I haven't started thinking about careers yet. And I think this is the last one I'll share. What is the primary source of your future education and career decisions? Family is the biggest one. Again, maybe not a surprise, but this is important to know, because if you're going to get this type of information about career exploration, et cetera, out there, we're largely going through the school system and sharing information that way. But a more effective way, if possible, would be sharing information with those family members that are then passing on information to the students. And they are much more trusted than, say, some labor market analyst that's coming in and yapping at them for an hour about the importance of career exploration. So this information can be super handy too. We have a few other questions, some that we will plan to rotate. Right now, there's 2 questions on artificial intelligence and how students are using it. So this is just an example. If you're really curious about learning more about this survey, feel free to reach out afterward. I'll throw actually the link in the chat so you can take a peek at it yourself. So that was asking what students think. We have data though to show what students are doing. The Minnesota High School Statewide Longitudinal Education Data System, we call it SLEDS because that is also a mouthful, is a way of tracking from K through 12 and beyond our students and their outcomes. So how students are faring, it tracks, graduation rates, et cetera. The piece that I'm really interested in is kind of what the choices that high school students are making after they graduate. Are they choosing to go to post-secondary, or are they choosing to go work right away? And how has that been changing over time? And how has that changed from place to place? Those are the types of questions that SLEDS can help us answer. So we use it a lot. An example of I found really effective is I'll go into a high school, and since SLEDS data are available by school district and even school, I can say, what do you think that your fellow students have done the last couple of years? Like your friends who graduated 2 years ago, what share of them do you think went to a 2-year college in the region? And they'll guess X amount, and I'll be like, well, actually, here's what actually happened. And I can show them. And that is super powerful for a lot of those students to see that. And that breaks it down a lot of perceptions too, that like, everybody's going to this or everybody's doing that. I can show them the data, like this is actually what they did. So for example, here in the chart, this is the percent of graduates statewide and at the Duluth Public School District, where I reside, that are enrolling in college. So you can see 42% statewide enrolled in college in Minnesota, and 20% enrolled outside of Minnesota. And then slightly smaller shares in Minnesota for Duluth. And interestingly, given that we're so close to Wisconsin, a smaller share enrolling outside of Minnesota for the Duluth Public School District. You can also see within that what type of school they're enrolling in. So are they going to Minnesota Public 4-year, like the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, or St. Cloud State, or UMD, like up here? Are they going outside Minnesota? A public 2-year school, like are they at Lake Superior College or Minnesota North? Or are they going to a private 4-year or private 2-year, much smaller private 2-year? And of most interest, the students don't care so much about what type of school as much as what exact school students are going to. And SLEDS is able to tell us that as well. So you can say, Rock Ridge, I was presenting a couple weeks ago. Most of those students that are graduating, going post-secondary, they're staying in the region. They're going to Minnesota North, which is pretty cool. Minnesota Twin Cities, second option, UMD, etc. Students are really interested in that as well. And for those that choose to be employed right away, we can track how much they're employed. So like how many hours a week they're working on average. Most are employed part-time, 20 hours or less. And then what sector or industry are they employed in? So you can see that most are in trade, transportation, and utilities, about a third of all of the students statewide. And then you can also see what they're making in those different sectors. Some students, depending on the sector they're in, can make a lot more. So the 8% that are in construction tend to be making some of the highest wages. And then there's a pretty big chunk that end up working in leisure and hospitality, which is like a traditional industry or sector for a lot of young people to be working in service industries. And those wages tend to be a little bit lower. We looked at, so if you put it together, enrolled in college or employed, this is the full spectrum of graduates enrolled in college, 62%. This is statewide as of 2023. 27% were employed. Those that are enrolled in college may also be working. We're not separating those out in these data. So the ones that are working or employed here are just employed. And then unknown. So the way that this is connected is there must be a valid social security number that is then connected to unemployment insurance wage records. So if you don't have those, we can't necessarily track them. And if you're employed outside of Minnesota, we also aren't able to track you because these are wage records specific to Minnesota. And you can show the trends over time. So from SLEDS, what does this chart look like through time? You can see that those are enrolled in college, graduates that choose to be enrolled in college, has declined since 2009, almost about 8 percentage points. At the same time, employed has grown and unknown has grown. These are trends that I feel like a lot of people on this call are probably pretty well aware of, but this is the way to just really confirm what they actually are. And I will point out that the share that were enrolled actually grew from 2022 to 2023. So there was kind of like a big decline going into the pandemic or early coming out of the pandemic, but we're starting to see a rebound in post-secondary enrollment. One thing that I talk to students about a lot is wages. They're very interested in this topic, as you might expect, but one way to test them is to ask them, what do you think the median wage is in your region? And again, that's half the jobs are making above that, half the jobs are making below that. Anybody have any guesses what the median wage in Northeast Minnesota is in 2025? So I asked high school students about this, and I'm sometimes pleasantly surprised that they are paying attention or know this from maybe some other means or have kind of a sense, but for the most part, I'm not expecting them to know. But does anybody have a guess that you want to throw in the chat? And you can guess either in hourly wages or annual wage. But I'm interested to see what you all think. Yeah, 55,000. I need one more guess. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you for humoring me. So if we're doing Price is Right rules, I think Brandy might have won. Nice work, congrats. Otherwise, I think Laura, you might be very close as well with quick math. So 49,000 roughly a year, 2341 hourly is what that equates to. But then the conversation, I try to connect it to like educational requirements or training. Okay, so you have an idea of what the typical worker is making. You might not start out making that amount if you're entering the workforce, but eventually after a certain number of years, like that is kind of the benchmark. If you know that you want to go get post-secondary training or education of some sort, or if you know you have an occupation that you want to do that requires that, I then talk about this chart. So this is a distribution of wages by typical education required. So all the jobs put together that require a doctoral professional degree, the jobs that require a master's degree, bachelor's, associate, vocational, and then only high school or less, and their wage distribution. So the blue bar here represents the 25th to 75th percentile wage. So half of all the people working in those jobs make between those ends of those two blue bars, the red line being the median wage. So you're like, oh, just go get a doctoral professional degree. It pays $63.86 an hour. There's only 3,000 of those jobs in Northeast Minnesota out of 150,000. So not a ton of people have that job, and there aren't a ton of those jobs to be got. That's not to say that there's a lot of training and expense and time that goes into getting to those jobs. So maybe master's a little bit better. There's a few more of those jobs. The wages are a lot lower relatively. Bachelor's is actually a little bit higher on average than master's. And the wage distribution is pretty big. There's a lot more jobs there. Associate, a lot of students will point out the associate median wage is higher than both bachelor's and master's in Northeast Minnesota. Does anybody have any guesses? As there's one occupation that actually is pulling that wage up for that. And we talked about it a little bit earlier in the presentation. There's one occupation that is pulling that up. Registered nurses. Registered nurses typically require an associate degree, but they pay pretty high wages almost right out of the gate. And that is a big chunk of those 9,000 jobs are actually just RNs. Vocational awards, so we're talking about like apprenticeships, that sort of thing. And then high school or less. Yes, most jobs require either a high school or less. But what I'll point out is that the distribution here, the width of that wage potential is not huge. Those jobs might be a lot more bountiful and easier to get, but the wage earning potential is not nearly as high as it is in some of these other occupations. So we just have this conversation. Related to this is our Career and Education Explorer. I really want to shout this out for the main reason that it contains our eligible training provider list. Some of you that are job counselors will be familiar with this. It is the list of all of the trainings that are WIOA approved. So if you're trying to connect them to training that can be funded for them to change careers or upskill, got to be on the ETPL. And the Career and Education Explorer is a really good way to explore that, either from the occupational side or from the educational side. So you can search both ways, and that is what it is super handy for. Just wanted to mention that really quickly. There's some examples, again, using registered nurses. And you can search by area for field of study. If you want to go to school in a specific region, you can filter that way and sort. But I want to move on to kind of the other side. We've talked about a lot of the career exploration tools. I want to move on to what I'm calling tools and data for outcomes and assessment. Super excited about this section. I spend a lot of time with these data. I think it's super interesting and overlooked. The big one that I want to start with is graduate employment outcomes. Graduate employment outcomes is probably our most underappreciated data set. I think it's changing a little bit more. It's getting a little more attention. Originally put together by our researcher, Alicia Liebert, this is a way to highlight the relationships between our post-secondary educational systems and our workforce. So this is probably what ties together those two most directly. So I think the best way to show this is to demonstrate it. I'm going to kind of do a highlight here, and then I'm going to show you in the tool exactly some of the things you can do. But at the high level, it tracks the number of graduates from Minnesota institutions. So it has to be a Minnesota institution, but every post-secondary institution in Minnesota is in here. And it breaks it down by program, award type. We say award, what we mean is type of degree or certificate. Oh, thank you so much, Barbara, for throwing in there. I forgot to do that. Awesome. Yes, so the graduate employment outcomes, you could track by major, degree type, and then really cool, you can track to see those graduates in that program at that school. What region do they end up employed in the state, if they end up employed in the state. Same kind of caveat as SLEDs is they have to be employed in Minnesota. So we can't track people if they've gone and got employed in Wisconsin or Iowa, unfortunately. But if you went to school in Minnesota and you're employed in Minnesota, this can show what the outcomes are. It can also show you what industry, so like large level industry sector, those graduates are employed in. It's really powerful. There's a lot of spin-off tools that I think we're helping to kind of focus in on different aspects of the kind of core tool, and I'm going to show you some of those as well. But let's take a peek at graduate employment outcomes. This is what the data landing page looks like. You've got your navigation bar here on the left. I mentioned the different tabs on top. A little visualization here summarizing a slice of the data. So this is not all of data. This is not the tool, but this is just showing you what you can do with the data in the data tool. So what's shown here is the hourly median wage for 2016 graduates. And we use 2016 to show, to be able to show what they've done up to 6 years past graduation. So a lot of times, the year after you graduate, you may end up doing a job that not necessarily aligns exactly with your training or education. So we like to give 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years for folks to settle into their career path and really show the outcome in its true form. So biochemistry, biophysics, and molecular biology is this orange line. 2 years post-graduation or 1 year post-graduation, you see the median wage down here. And this is what we like to see. As you have more years after graduation, your wages are rising. That is ideally what we would like to see, right? But not all of them are rising at the same rate. Down here, carpenters started out 19, probably less education required to go into that, but the wages are not rising as fast. If you want to just compare across specific award types, so let's just look at associate degrees, you can do that as well. So here you've got associate in accounting and related. You start out making more, but that biology degree associate ends up making a little bit more later on down the line. Some of that may be they study biology as an associate, they transfer to another program, they finish off getting their 4-year degree in biology, they have more earning potential, but it's delayed a little bit longer than, say, the carpenter and the accountant who are working right away. So it's important to see that longer term view. You can filter by award level, so certificate below bachelor's, graduate degrees or certificates, And then you can also go by specific school. Let's pick, let's do Macalester College. It's where I resided for a few years, and we don't have a graduate degree, so it'd have to be bachelor's. Compare here, biology, psychology, the two that we have enough to track. If you've got fewer than 10, we won't have the data to track you necessarily through that. But it looks like biology and psychology, two of the biggest degrees in Macalester, pretty similar pathways in terms of wage outcomes. Okay, so that is just one piece. Let's look at the actual tool. All right, so I'll just break down the options here. You can go back to the page we just came from. If you really want to dive into the data and how it's created, very similar way to SLEDs. So being able to connect students with social security numbers to wage records in Minnesota. That's the kind of cliff notes of the methodology. Graduation year, we go back to 2015, 2016. And then you may say 2022 is a while ago, but we have graduation data, but we have to wait 2 years to get the outcomes, right? Because we don't want to publish the 1-year outcomes because that's not super reflective of where graduates actually end up. So we wait 2 years and then we can get the outcomes data. Award type I showed you, you can look at, you can compare them all to each other or just do all awards. I like looking at associate degree in all awards, and then institution types. So let's say you just want to compare within public 2-year state colleges. It'll give you the list of those schools. So you can look at a specific school, or let's say you just want to look at all of them. And then you can do all programs grand total, all programs subtotal, or if you know kind of what area, instructional program area you are interested in, you can do that as well. I'm going to do subtotals because I like looking at all of them next to each other. And then I hit view results, and we're in this one tab here. The first tab is hourly wage trends. We're focusing on wages. And what we have is the award type. So you'll see all awards and associate like we selected above, and then the instructional program group. You'll notice this little plus here. That means we can expand it to see the sub. So this is the 2-digit classification of instructional program or zip code level. We go down to the 4-digit level here. So you see the different 4-digit agriculture operations, and related sciences programs that are available and offered in Minnesota as of 2021, 2022, the number of graduates from those programs at that award type, the median hourly wage 2 years after graduation. We don't have a median hourly wage here for the 3rd year yet because we only have that 2-year data. We have to wait for that, but we do know what industry they're employed in. So if I was looking to see, okay, where are these graduates employed in? Hopefully you can see this. Most are employed in professional, or the largest share are employed in professional and technical services, wholesale trade, agriculture, forestry, fishing, and then you can see the median wages for them as well. And this is for a combined 664 employed graduates from 2019 and 2023. So it's not just these 21, 22 grads. And then you can see what region they are employed in. This is much more even than a lot of instructional program outcomes because agriculture is much more dispersed than some of the others. So say, example, if I did computer science here, you'd get like 70% Twin Cities, and then less than 10% for the rest of the regions. That is super handy. The next tab looks at annual wage and employment. Same kind of idea, but this is focusing on the employment outcomes a little bit more. So graduates, the same, you get the same 4 or 5 columns here, but then you have employed graduates with reported wages during the year. So you can see like what share of them are reporting wages in Minnesota, the median annual wage, and then the percent that are working full-time year-round. So this is a super important metric. You could be employed, let's say you study biological and biomedical sciences, But if you're employed working at the coffee shop down there, you'll still be counted as employed in Minnesota, but that's not necessarily tied to the outcome of that program, is it? A good example here is the median wage. You've got 22,635. That's probably lower than what you would see if you looked at past the second year of graduation, and you definitely probably see 15% be higher. So only 15% of those grads from this are working full time. And I'd say a big part of that is they're continuing their education, and we'll check on that theory here in a second. 85% are working part-time or seasonally. And then we go here and we can look at the third tab, and this one dives a little bit more into that. Are they working in Minnesota or are they continuing education? So we're looking at biological sciences. It's one of the highest of continuing education of all these different majors and programs. 10% are at least continuing their education or not found in Minnesota wage records, so they might be employed in another state. And then you have some programs where being employed in another state is much more likely, say medicine. Physicians are much more likely to disperse than some of these other programs, graduates of these other programs. You can download the results in Excel and kind of manipulate it as you want. But going back to that biological and medical sciences question, so my theory was that maybe some of them are not necessarily employed in a related sector. So if we look here, the top one is healthcare, the second one is retail trade. So I think I'm safe in saying that a lot of the students that are studying biological and biomedical sciences aren't necessarily aiming to be employed in retail trade unless they're selling maybe biomedical devices, right? But you can see that the wages are lower there too. Healthcare, a little bit higher. So you can really dive into these outcomes in a lot of different ways, answering a lot of really cool questions. I will pause here for any questions on graduate employment outcomes specifically before we move on to the next tool. Right. Okay, so that's the core graduate employment outcomes. As I mentioned before, Alessia Liebert has put together tools to kind of pull out different subsets of these data. You're familiar with these now, so you just saw that. That's just an example. The first, what I would say, tool in the GEO family is the College Major to Career Connector. So this is aimed more at the career exploration kind of side, but what it does is it allows those folks that are exploring educational and career options to search for majors starting from a career of interest. So if they have a career that they are interested in learning about, like how you get there, so you can find out what programs are connected to it. Or vice versa, you have a program maybe you're in already or you really are interested in, and you want to know what jobs that is most likely to prepare you for. So you can explore the full range of careers that a specific major can prepare you for. Let's take a peek at this one. This one is an exception to that rule I was telling you before about the landing page is not the tool. This one is a tool. You notice there's no button that says go to data tool. That's a sign that it is just this here. So this visualization is the tool. So you can start from the careers to majors perspective or from majors to careers. So careers to majors is going to put the career occupation on the left, and then it's going to list all the majors that are designed to prepare for that career. Vice versa, majors on the left with the occupations that that major is preparing those students for. So it's right now we've got one field of study selected, precision production, and then all of the majors that are in that field of study will show up here, and then you can select from them. So let's say you're most interested in computer numerically controlled or CNC machinist. or maybe welding or machine tool technology. They populate down here, and then you can see the number of jobs that are currently in that occupation in Minnesota as of, I think, 2025. So that's what the length of the bar represents. The median annual wage for that occupation is the red dot. So there are more tool operators, CNC tool operators in Minnesota, but they make a slightly lower median wage. And then there are fewer programmers and they make a higher wage. And then you can see the same thing with machine tool technology and machinist. That's a major. These are all the occupations. There's more occupations that that program or major connects you with. So that might be something that a student's interested in, right? I want a major that gives me flexibility in the options I'll have afterwards. So I want to study something that connects to a lot of occupations. Someone else maybe like, I know I want to be a dentist. So there's one program connected to one occupation. But this is a good way to kind of compare that and see like, okay, this occupation, this program looks like it's kind of going to put me into one of these few occupations, or this occupation maybe is too broad. It's connecting to 50 occupations. So a good example of that would be, I know there's probably some people here in education. Some of the education programs connect to a lot more occupations. So you can see here, or maybe a better is business. So if you go study business and commerce, you've got what is here like a dozen different occupations that you're connected to, which may be a good thing, or it may be a thing where like, I know I'd be overwhelmed in trying to figure out how I hone my skill set to connect to one of those occupations. So that's too many, like that connection is too loose for me. I want something that's more direct. Registered nursing is another one that's, you study registered nursing, vast majority of those graduates go into registered nursing. And just because they're connected here, I will say that does not necessarily mean that all those graduates are going into these jobs in that proportion. So for example, general and operations managers, this is not to say that the majority of the graduates from a business administration and management program are going to become general and operations managers. It's just one of the occupations that's identified as being prepared for via that program. Okay, so that's the college major to career connector, the first of the GEO family. The next one I want to show you is the college major to industry of employment. So you're like, wait a second, that sounds very similar. It's a little bit different. So career would be an occupation. Industry, so let's say you have a little bit more broad kind of focus. You want to work in construction. You want to work in manufacturing. Industry would be what the business is doing. Career is more what the occupation individual, the individual is doing. That's what an occupation is. So say you are interested in, like I said, manufacturing, what jobs are programs are connected to that industry. So that's what this one is showing. And I am neglecting to put these into the chat, so I apologize. Here's the career connector. So that's the one we just looked at. And then the one that we're going to look at right now is right here. Okay, college major to industry of employment. Kind of similar setup as the connector one, career connector we just looked at, but there's a few key differences. Again, you've got field of study, so you can select your field of study. You've got business, management, marketing right now, and then you can filter by different major, and you can also filter by degree. So let's say you're just interested in bachelor's within business and what industries those would connect to. And I'll point out that this is for information 3 years after graduation. So we're focusing on that, a little time for folks to get set. If you aren't seeing what you are interested in terms of a program or major, you can search by keyword. So let's say I want to focus on accounting. I type it in, hit enter. It just filters to those that have accounting in their title. So accounting, program or major, these are the industries connected to. It's a lot of industries. I often tell people accounting's great. You can do accounting in every industry. It's an occupation that kind of transcends industries because everyone needs accounting, no matter what business activity you're doing. And that reflects here. So for all of the industries, so percent of graduates that are working in the industry, 100%. So that's just kind of the sum of all of these. But the number of those working in the industry here is total all industries. It's about 2,570. So that's accounting majors. Of that, though, which is more interesting, is where in the detailed industries are these graduates ending up or connected to. Professional technical services. So that's like consulting firms, engineering, computer design, accounting firms would be there. So no surprise that 36% are there, employed in that industry, followed by finance and insurance, firm headquarters, manufacturing, public, etc. But what is interesting is, well, that exactly is the distribution of the graduates employed by industry. Another one we can look at, I mentioned computer and information sciences earlier. Oh, I've got accounting here, so I was filtering myself ahead of time. You can see here, and I neglected to say the median wage was the other thing that's super interesting. So you can see, depending on what industry you're working in, is there a big difference in median wage? I want to focus on computer science. Professional technical services again. So that's where computer design, $44 as the median wage. However, if you're doing computer science, study computer science and working in retail trade, you're earning $21.58. To me, that implies you're not necessarily using those computer science skills from that program or major. You may just be working a job part-time or in between while you're searching for that job where you actually apply those computer science skills. All right, any questions on college major to industry employment? All right, we shall forge on. All right, the third and final in the geo family focuses on the earnings by those different programs, awards, school, etc. Put that into chat. And this one is unique in that it pulls in data from another tool that we have, our cost of living tool. So some questions you can answer with the graduate earnings and cost calculator is, are the expected earnings post-graduation from a specific major or program enough to cover the basic needs cost of living? And if you know what your student loan is going to be or is, you can put that in and it'll add it into your typical costs to see kind of like, are your net earnings going to be positive, which is ideally what we want for everybody, right? You can also ask which majors lead to higher earnings and how fast do those earnings grow. So over time, you know, we talked about this earlier, some majors and programs start out lower, but then have great earning potential growth. Others start higher and kind of stay there, etc. And then lastly, how do earnings vary by major, by type of school within the same major? So let's say you're considering a specific program and several schools offer it, or several type of schools offer it. It may be a 2-year versus a 4-year. That could be a significant difference in cost. So knowing what the wage outcomes are essentially the same between those two or very different, that could be very important for someone trying to compare these two options. Take a quick peek. Again, this is the tool here. I need to zoom out a little bit so you can see it all. Okay, 3 tabs, cost calculator. So this is the first one. What this is showing is each bar represents a program. You can filter by all of those field of study, which you are somewhat familiar with now. So let's focus on, which one have we not looked at yet? Maybe mechanic and repair technologies. Let's throw in engineering and engineering technologies. And what you could do is you could say all majors, and then you get a bunch of bars. And the big thing to look at here is we've got this orange line, which is the typical living wage in Minnesota as of the year that we're focusing on here. And then you could also filter by the location of the school. So let's say we're interested in schools in central Minnesota. Associate is the credential level, but you could choose here which credential level you want. Stick with associate. And you could also look at the type of school. So Minnesota State 2 years, which should be most of these. You have the typical cumulative debt for programs in this selection. So basically this is the average cumulative debt after finishing an associate degree program in Minnesota. So for Minnesota State 2 year, that's about 12,500. So that's listed here so that if you want to see how that would impact the costs and your net earnings, you could put that in here. So you could say 12,459, entered in. You might have seen a little change down here. This is the net earnings. So it's basically these bars subtracting this living wage number here and subtracting the typical month annual loan cost here based off of 5% interest rate. Add all those costs together and you subtract those costs from your typical median wage for these programs, and that's what you get for net earnings. So obviously, if I'm looking at these, I'm like, I want the ones with the high net earnings. So you can see here, energy systems technician, there's only 11 graduates there, so it's not a huge program. HVAC maintenance technician, a little bit bigger. Apparently there's 18 grads from central 2-year schools. A little bit bigger, automation engineer and technology and technician. So you can look at those. One thing that's somewhat interesting is if you do all, so these are all the programs offered, associate programs offered in central Minnesota, you can really quickly see the ones that are estimated to have negative net earnings too, which really bums me out because childcare and support services management, a super crucial job, digital communications, early childhood education and teaching, like that's a bummer for me, but these are actual like wage outcomes. And then over here is teaching aid, another one that bums me out. Like things that we need, right? And we know, especially childcare has been in the news so much. But these are showing that the wage outcomes here are not great, which in turn, from my perspective, is connected to demand for those positions. Super high demand for childcare providers and workers, but the wages are also quite low. So, you know, just an example of how you tie this to the larger analysis of the workforce. So that's the first tab. Oh, sorry. And then you can also filter by age at graduation. So if you want to look at new grads, so in the first kind of 10 years of their, or 5 to 10 years of their graduation, or later to mid-career, you can do that too. So the outcomes change quite a bit. You can see that when you go 2656, there's only a few that are net negative, which is good. You're more likely to be net negative if you're just starting out in your career. Earnings over time, we've looked at this kind of already. That's the landing page of the Geo Home tool has this. It's the same idea. So looking at how your wages change over time post-graduation, depending on what program, what school, what region. It's also interesting here. So an example that I often point out is, let's say you studied business administration and management. So that would be this kind of light orange here. You'll see a bit of a difference between like all ages here, all ages and 26 early career. A lot of folks that go and study, and I'll do all post-secondary credentials. Here we go. Business administration, much higher here for the 26, 25, or 56. And that's because a lot of folks that go and get their MBA are already mid-career. So when they go in, they're already bringing in a wage that is probably around the median or higher. So looking at this and saying like, oh, if I go get an MBA, I will, have great earning potential, but that's not necessarily the case. It may be a lot more dependent on where those students are coming from, those graduates are coming from. They're mid-career already, they already have higher earning potential. And getting the MBA may help boost that a little bit, but it's not the reason why they have that wage necessarily to begin with. And then the last tab here is by school type. So if you, again, are looking at a program and you're considering 2 different schools, maybe in the same region offering that program or across the state, this is a good way to compare both number of graduates, but then also the wage outcomes. So let's look at Northeast Minnesota. Located. You can select which schools you want to include in the comparison, the type of credential. Do associate, and actually statewide is probably more useful here. There we go. Accounting is one of the majors that we've got listed here. So accounting is offered private for-profit, Minnesota state colleges. Most of the folks that are studying accounting, associates in accounting, are graduating from Minnesota state colleges. You've got 732 that were employed 5 years later, making a median wage of $51,688. And you can see some more detail on the number of grads here, number working in Minnesota, and then the share of grads working full-time year-round. And then go down here, private for-profit, many fewer graduates, but the wage outcome's a little bit lower. So, you might want to balance this with the other things that are offered via these schools. I wouldn't say this is the only thing that I recommend people considering, but it's an important factor in kind of balancing your options. So you can select all the majors you want. The credential level is actually a little bit more detailed here, so you can divide it out by certificate. This is super handy because in an age where kind of like micro credentialing and all that is becoming more commonplace and more accepted by a lot of employers, these certificates are becoming more common, especially the ones with less than a year. So being able to assess those is super important and comparing them across different types of school. So we have that capability in this tool along with a bunch else. I'll pause there for any questions. And then here, just screenshots of those tabs I just showed you. Okay, got a few minutes left. I want to make sure I cover this one. This is our high school technical education pathways and outcomes. This is not a geo tool per se, but it follows that same model, but it's focused on career and technical education, CTE, in Minnesota. It's basically doing a lot of the same things that these geo tools are doing or attempting to. So folks that are studying, or high school students that are studying career and technical education courses, taking, I think it's at least 100 hours of CTE, and then spending at least 58 of those hours in a specific course topic. What are those wage outcomes or education outcomes of those students? So this is a relatively new tool that Alessia also put together that's super interesting. It's got a lot of the same kind of detail and way to slice and dice the data. So by wage, by course topic, but region of school. Some of the questions you can answer are which CTE pathways lead to higher wages, but also how do those educational attainment pathways vary by program? So if students are studying construction in high school in a CTE class, are they more or less likely to continue education post-secondary as compared to somebody that's maybe studying culinary arts in CTE? So you can look at those types of things and do some assessment in comparison. Which industries employ CTE participants? So where are they most likely to end up? Construction is a top one. That might not be a surprise. It's kind of one of the classic CTE course topics and career fields, but it's expanding a lot. If any of you are familiar with CTE, you know that there's a lot of courses that weren't traditionally considered to be in CTE that are now being included in the under the mantle. And it's really cool to see like healthcare is definitely a burgeoning CTE field. And then which programs are highest or lowest supply in each region. I love his dot chart, so we're going to go look at it real quick. I owe you a link. Okay, looks a lot like some of those other geo tools. Handily, each tab has the question that it's aimed at answering. So the first one is the wage trends. Again, very similar type of effort to the geo wage trends. There's a little bit more complication here because these are high school students. They're much more likely to enter post-secondary and continue education than necessarily the geo graduates are. So again, you can filter by field of study, the detailed course topics. So business is a CTE, a potential CTE field of study, which is great. Hospitality, international business. And then when you hover over, you get the number that are working in Minnesota. So again, the same thing, they need to be working in Minnesota for us to be able to track them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years post-graduation. And then you can filter by whether they enrolled in post-secondary, enrolled and have not completed. So either in or dropped out, like currently in or dropped out, whether they obtain their credential of a bachelor's or below or a bachelor's or above. So it's super cool to be able to see like, the students that are studying, biology, I guess not a huge one, but these students here, the ones that go to bachelor's, maybe their outcomes are different than those that have a credential below bachelor's. Or you can see how many chose to enroll versus did not enroll, and then how that differed from region to region. I'm guessing not every region has, so Northeast doesn't have enough biology and biomedical. I'm guessing Metro is most of it. Yep. So you can see how it varies by region too. Second tab, and I'm going to be running out of time here, so I'm going to go through these a little quicker. How do educational attainment pathways vary? So getting more at that question of like, okay, they enrolled, they haven't finished, or they dropped out, or they did finish, they got a bachelor's, or they have not. How is that reflected in median wage outcomes by different detailed course topics? Which industries are they ending up in? So this is very similar to that industry connector tool that we looked at earlier for geo. So you have your detailed course topic, like your major, and then the industry that it's connected to, with wage outcomes and employment shares by those industries. So no surprise that those studied construction, finishing, and building maintenance, the highest share is construction. And that's good, right? Like that's a connection that I think our CTE folks would be pleased to see. And then this is that dot chart I was telling you about. So each of these dots represents a detailed topic. So you can see how many spent that amount of time. So the x-axis is the number working. And then the y-axis is the annual median wages 5 years after high school. So which CTE, this is basically telling us which CTE programs are big or small, and then which ones have wage outcomes that are, either really high or low or in between. So design and applied arts is a very popular CTE course. The wage outcomes necessarily aren't at median. Vehicle repair is also popular and does have higher wage outcomes, although the top industry of employment there is retail, not necessarily like repair or maintenance. And again, you can filter by a lot of the same things, the region, credential. So that is also great. All right, we're running out of time, so I gotta wrap it up. NCES, really quickly, National Center for Education Statistics. I pull a lot of great information from here via their integrated post-secondary education data system, or IPEDS. College Navigator is a super handy resource for those that are comparing institutions and want to see how tuition compares, different costs and fees, living on campus versus off campus, books, other materials. So I really point a lot of the high school students to this when they're looking at post-secondary. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to go through this case study. So if you're interested in what this was, I can talk about it afterward. I want to get to wrapping up. So there's a bunch of tools and resources, if you can believe it, that I did not cover today. Happy to talk about those with you as well, but a lot of occupational and industry data, unemployment insurance, wages. We have our regional and data and industry profile, regional and county and industry profiles, which kind of summarize different areas or industries for folks. And I mentioned the research and blogs that we do. Again, the big takeaway is that we are a resource for you all in your roles. So please feel free to reach out to us. We develop and conduct research aimed at assisting both job seekers, but also folks that are administrators, counselors, trying to help job seekers, anyone trying to make sound decisions in their roles, I think can be helped by labor market information and our DEED LMI crew. So we can be a resource for you. This is our regional analysis team. We have other folks down in St. Paul that are doing a lot of the research and crunching a lot of the numbers behind the scenes, but we are kind of the outward-facing team to help you answer your questions, and connect you to the information that you need to do your jobs. So I recommend that you reach out to us with any questions you have or problems you're trying to fix. There's a lot there, and I know this might be a little overwhelming, but we're here to help you get to what you actually need. So I threw a lot of information at you. Hopefully some of it can be useful for you, and it's probably just a small slice, but I can help you, and the rest of us can help you get to what that small slice is that you need. So I'll stop here and just thank you so much for an hour and a half of your day. Really appreciate you taking the time. I hope you can take something with you. Tell your friends, tell your coworkers, and I'll stick around to answer some questions for any folks that want to do so. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Hi, Carson. I have a very specific question, if it's okay with you. I work with a lot of students studying data science in particular, and I'm never sure really how to find or classify that. I have trouble finding that in a lot of the drop downs within Indeed. Just like